there is an important story that I really hope we're going to stay on. And I've spoken about this before. And I said to you, we need to make sure that we stay on this so that we see some level of accountability. There's no way that you can have a company or a foundation that does work with any entity, in this case a state entity, and then the state pays that foundation to do work, and then you now found out that actually the foundation has been involved possibly in fraudulent signatures for them to continue receiving monies from that state entity. And then you find out that that foundation is involved in building a home, right, for the CEO of that state entity. I'm talking here about the Collen Mashawana Foundation. The Daily Maverick is now reporting that it has exited the IDT jobs program after Daily Maverick's fraudulent signatures exposé. And they've exited this EPWP contract after the IDT actually asked them for supporting documentation because there's an investigation that's currently underway. So we've invited Pieter-Louis Myburgh, who is an investigative journalist with the Daily Maverick, to give us context on what happened. And I want us to focus on this because I've said to you, one of the things I want to do over the next couple of months is to focus on these small implementing agencies of government, because that's where the corruption is also happening. And we are busy focused on the big state-owned entities, but they're actually implementing agents, even of government departments. And that's where money is also being stolen. We need to start paying attention to that. And this is part of those efforts. So let's welcome Pieter-Louis Myburgh, who's an investigative journalist who's been working on this story for some time now. Peter, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning, Clement. Yes, this is an important issue, and I hope we can get to the bottom of this latest round of reporting. So I think there's really a lot to unpack.
Yeah, let's start just with laying the foundation so that the listeners can understand why this is important and why it matters. Can you explain the relationship between the Collen Mashawana Foundation and the Independent Development Trust? What is this contract that they got? What were they supposed to do, and what did they do?
Yes, Clement. Yeah. So in mid-2024, last year, the Independent Development Trust, which is this government body that slots in under the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, they issued a tender inviting NGOs and non-profit and charitable foundations to apply for contracts to roll out on the IDT's behalf these expanded public works program initiatives all over South Africa. So, your listeners would probably be familiar with the EPWP program. We frequently see individuals next to the roadside, for instance, they'll wear these EPWP branding, and they'd be cutting grass or tending to road maintenance and that kind of work. So it's a government initiative to foster or encourage employment in South Africa by offering employment opportunities to individuals who don't have work, and they get these sort of salaries in the range of 2,000 Rand a month, more or less. So it's really not a considerable income, but at least something for people who don't have work. So the IDT then, they get a chunk of the government's EPWP funding, and they then in turn go out on tender and invite entities like the Collen Mashawana Foundation, but also hundreds across the country, hundreds of other NPOs, to submit bids for rolling out EPWP schemes to employ people to get some employment going across South Africa. And then, worryingly, what we identified in the case of the Collen Mashawana Foundation, since our reporting started in August this year, is that there are these various discrepancies and issues with the Collen Mashawana Foundation program specifically. We reported in August, for instance, that there were workers down in the Free State who indicated that they weren't getting their money. They would sometimes get 300 Rand a month instead of 1,700 Rand a month. So there were these gaps between what was going to the workers and what the foundation was supposed to pay them. And now we also expanded our reporting, including this latest round, which shows that in Limpopo, where the largest batch of workers for the Collen Mashawana Foundation were located, that there appears to be an instance where hundreds of them, they signed for payments because you're supposed to sign these payment sheets to confirm that you got the money from the foundation. But it turns out that, hundreds of them possibly, the signatures on these documents were forged, and the money did go to the foundation, and then ultimately these workers did not get the money. And it's quite a heartbreaking story because frequently, they put in hours and hours of work.
Yeah.
And the money was not simply going
And
to
it's not
them.
even a lot of money, Peter. These people are actually desperate for that money, and yet for some reason it doesn't get to their hands as it's supposed to. What did the IDT do about this as soon as you exposed it?
Yeah, so we have to laud the IDT under its current leadership, its new leadership. It's got an acting CEO, and there's also a new board of trustees and a new chairperson. And I'm quite impressed by the speed at which they reacted to Daily Maverick's reporting. So on Monday, we put out what really looks like very compelling cases of alleged signatures fraud on behalf of the Collen Mashawana Foundation, and they then kind of effectively or immediately jumped into action and demanded answers from the Collen Mashawana Foundation. The IDT issued a letter asking for clarity on some of these allegations. They requested documentation that would have been in the Collen Mashawana Foundation's that they would have had to submit and had to collate and keep record of. And those were the bits of clarity the IDT sought from the Collen Mashawana Foundation. But ultimately, the foundation then decided to, instead of cooperating with what appeared to be quite reasonable requests from the IDT, they then unilaterally decided to withdraw from the program instead of cooperating.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And then now, help us understand what the relationship of this foundation is now with the CEO of the IDT, who's now on suspension, Tebogo Malaka.
Yeah, so there is, of course, that deeper backstory that that kind of revolves around our August exposés. There was that really explosive bit of material, the video material that we had collected, where I had a meeting with the IDT CEO in Cape Town, and that's when that infamous bribe, the bribe offer was made by Tebogo Malaka and her spokesperson at his side, Pasha Makalani. And that whole kind of bribe offer, the backstory there is the issue they wanted to cover up was this very matter. So I was looking into Tebogo Malaka's financial ties to Collen Mashawana, the chairperson of this foundation, because we'd collected information showing that the business person in question, Mr. Mashawana, he was in fact channeling money to a private property being built for Tebogo Malaka at the very time in which this EPWP contract was playing out at the IDT. So, you've got this instance or this case of money not going to EPWP workers where they should have been paid, and instead money seems to be flowing to, at least in two instances, to this property being built in the Waterfall Country Estate. And, that obviously raises questions as to whether the missing funds are in fact being diverted to building a property for the then CEO, IDT CEO, Tebogo Malaka. And that really is the issue, by all appearances, that they were so desperate to bury by offering me a bribe so that matter would not be exposed. And of course, we kept on working on the issue and then exposed all of those financial ties after we published that video in August.
How much money has the Collen Mashawana Foundation been paid by the IDT to manage these EPWP initiatives in these provinces? I think it was Limpopo, Free State, Northwest Gauteng, and KwaZulu-Natal, right?
Correct, yeah. So those 5 provinces, and it's a 60 million rand contract over 2 years. And it looks like my records show, the records that I've managed to obtain, shows that so far they've gotten 27 million rand. So, I mean, there's a fair bit of money to account for. If it really does, if it does come to the fore that most of that money did not go to the workers, or substantial chunks of that money wasn't paid out to the workers, then obviously there would be possible criminal implications and fraud implications and corruption implications that need to be probed further.
Yeah, we're having a conversation with Pieter-Louis Myburgh, who is an investigative journalist with the Daily Maverick. They have released a story around the Collen Mashawana Foundation. In fact, it's another story because following Daily Maverick's recent revelations over fraudulent signatures in a government employment scheme, the Independent Development Trust has demanded documents from the Collen Mashawana Foundation, the non-profit implicated in the alleged fraud. And instead of complying with the IDT's directive, the foundation has opted to hastily withdraw from the contract. You remember, Pieter-Louis Myburgh was telling us that 60 million rand is how much this contract was worth. I think so far over 20 million rand has been paid to the foundation. And the people who work, through this EPWP program are so desperate and they don't even get paid a lot of money. And yet, from the reports from Daily Maverick, some of them didn't get their monies. In some instances, they were not paid the monies as they were supposed to. And the important context to keep in mind here is while all of that was happening, right, while monies were paid to the Collen Mashawana Foundation, then the Daily Maverick reported that there was a property being built for the now suspended CEO of the IDT, Tebogo Malaka. A property being built inside the Waterfall Country Estate, and the reports detailed cash flows from the Mashawana-linked entities to contractors who are working on Malaka's new home. And these payments were effected within the very same period in which the IDT transferred the EPWP workers' salaries to Mashawana's charitable foundation. Pieter-Louis, there's a question here that I've got from a listener who wants to know what's happening. Are the Hawks investigating this kind of relationship, particularly this Collen Mashawana Foundation relationship with the suspended CEO in this property being built in Waterfall?
Yes, yeah. So we understand that there is an active Hawks probe currently looking into the cash flows specifically related to that property deal and also the Collen Mashawana Foundation's EPWP work for the IDT.
Okay. And then another person, Mike, on the WhatsApp line says, Clement, is there any criminal case that is open against this Tebogo Malaka for all these allegations of corruption and wanting to bribe a journalist? What's the update on that? Because that video that was released after your interaction with her, everybody was just shocked, and she tried to do interviews to sort of justify. It just didn't make sense still. Is there an investigation into that?
Yes, yeah, so those are separate matters, and there's another Hawks team looking at the video angle. So there's the alleged bribery investigation, and that is an active Hawks investigation. And then a separate Hawks investigation is ongoing into the EPWP contract and the property and those kind of financial dealings.
Okay. And in terms of the EPWP contract now, do we know what the IDT then's next point of call is? Because the foundation has walked away. I would imagine then they bring in the next, they'll try and get another, issue out a tender for another organization. But are they going to continue with the investigation? Because the Mashawana Foundation withdrawing doesn't necessarily mean that, if they were investigating, that has to stop.
Yeah, no, thankfully, so I had a look at the letter that the IDT issued and also its statement afterwards, and luckily they seem to be quite resolute to continue their work. So they're not letting the Collen Mashawana Foundation off the hook merely because it's chosen to withdraw from the contract. They've got their internal checks and balances and their own processes, and they've indicated that they will continue to investigate the matter, those issues that we've exposed so far.
Well, Pieter-Louis Myburgh, thank you so much for speaking to us. He's an investigative journalist with the Daily Maverick. I thought it's important to get an update on what has happened between the IDT and the Collen Mashawana Foundation because, something has been brewing there for a while, and Daily Maverick has really exposed how the Collen Mashawana Foundation actually got to even get this contract to manage EPWP initiatives in these 5 provinces at a cost of 60 million rand. And now when you read that actually the foundation is somehow involved in a property being built at Waterfall Estate for the CEO, who we have seen in a video seemingly was present when a bribe was being offered to a journalist, makes you wonder. And remember, even in that video that was revealed, the CEO even said, we can, facilitate a meeting between you and the Collen Mashawana Foundation. They know, they're aware. there must be accountability for these things.
Hanging out with Clement
on 702.
Let's walk the talk.